38 years ago, on Christmas Eve 1987, Father Thomas Reynolds vanished during midnight mass in front of 200 faithful parishioners at his church in Cedar Falls, a small town in the heart of Iowa. Without leaving a trace, the 53-year-old priest simply disappeared in the middle of Christianity's most sacred celebration, plunging his congregation into silent terror and his diocese into an unprecedented crisis of faith. The Catholic community, which for more than 2 decades had found comfort and spiritual guidance in Father Reynolds' words, found themselves lost in a labyrinth of unanswered questions. Before we continue, subscribe, like this video, and hit the notification bell. This helps the channel bring you more stories like this one. The Cedar Falls police considered every imaginable possibility, from a nervous breakdown to a possible kidnapping, but couldn't find a single tangible clue, causing outrage among parishioners who never lost hope of finding their spiritual pastor. Fighting tirelessly for the truth to come to light, the Diocese of Dubuque kept the case active for years, hiring private investigators and offering substantial rewards for information. It was a freezing December night when Father Thomas climbed the pulpit of St. Margaret's Catholic Church for the last time. The church was packed beyond capacity, with entire families gathered to celebrate the birth of Christ. Children held lit candles, while the choir sang Silent Night in perfect harmonies that echoed through the century-old stone walls. Father Reynolds, known for his eloquent sermons and unique ability to connect Scripture with the daily challenges of his congregation, began his homily with words that would become prophetically dark. Tonight, we witness humanity's greatest mystery, how light can emerge from the deepest darkness. For 23 years, Father Thomas had been more than a priest to Cedar Falls. He was confessor, marriage counselor, family mediator, and the man who had baptized, married, and buried 3 generations of the same community. An orphan since age 7, raised in a Catholic orphanage in Chicago, he had found his calling early and dedicated his entire life to divine service. His parishioners described him as a man of unshakable faith, but also deeply human, capable of crying with the bereaved and laughing with the celebrants. The last person to see him was Margaret Sullivan, a 78-year-old widow who always sat in the front row. According to her testimony to police, Father Reynolds had paused in the middle of his homily, stared fixedly at the crucifix above the altar, and murmured something inaudible before heading to the side confessional. "He seemed to have seen something we couldn't see," Margaret reported years later, her hands still trembling when recalling that night. "There was an expression in his eyes I never forgot. It wasn't fear, but a kind of terrible recognition." The confessional where Father Reynolds was last seen became the epicenter of an investigation that mobilized the FBI, private investigators, and even experts in paranormal phenomena. The small dark wooden booth, with its purple velvet curtains and the silver crucifix Father Thomas always carried, was examined centimeter by centimeter. There were no signs of struggle, suspicious footprints, or any physical evidence that could explain how a man of 6 feet 3 inches and 200 pounds had simply vanished from an enclosed space, surrounded by hundreds of witnesses. When Mass ended without the priest's return, the congregation initially assumed he had fallen ill or needed to attend some pastoral emergency. It was only when Deacon Andrew Morrison went to look for him in the confessional that the true dimension of the mystery was revealed. The small booth was empty, with only the echo of whispered prayers and the lingering scent of incense. None of the church's 3 exits had been used. All remained locked from the inside, and the only signs that Father Reynolds had been there were his purple stole carefully folded on the bench and his breviary open to the midnight prayer. The night that should have been one of celebration and spiritual renewal became the beginning of a nightmare that haunts Cedar Falls to this day. In a community where everyone knows each other by first name and where secrets rarely remain hidden for more than a week, Father Thomas Reynolds' disappearance broke all known logic. There were no known enemies, pending debts, or any earthly reason that could explain why a man dedicated to faith would simply vanish during the most sacred moment of the Christian year. Some disappearances challenge not only our understanding of reality, but our very faith in what we consider possible. The days following Father Reynolds' disappearance revealed a community fragmented by disbelief and fear. Cedar Falls, a town of 12,000 inhabitants where St. Margaret's Catholic Church served as the spiritual and social heart, found itself lost without its moral guide of 2 decades. What began as organized searches through Iowa's snowy fields quickly transformed into a complex police investigation that would expose deep fissures in the apparent harmony of the small rural community. Detective Sarah Mitchell, a 15-year veteran of the Cedar Falls Police Department, took charge of the investigation with the determination of someone who had never faced such a disturbing case. "In a small town, you think you know everyone's secrets," she would recall years later. But Father Reynolds' disappearance showed us that even the most peaceful places can hide impenetrable mysteries. The detective, a pragmatic 42-year-old woman raised in the Methodist tradition, found herself navigating the complex rituals and hierarchies of the Catholic Church while trying to build a coherent timeline of the missing priest's last days. The Diocese of Dubuque sent Father Michael O'Brien, a 38-year-old Irish priest, to temporarily take over the parish while investigations continued. Father O'Brien, known for his younger, more contemporary pastoral approach, faced the difficult task of ministering to a traumatized congregation that saw every empty Sunday in the pulpit as a painful reminder of their inexplicable loss. "People came to Mass expecting answers I couldn't give," he confessed in an interview years later. How do you explain to a 7-year-old child why her favorite priest simply disappeared during prayer? Margaret Sullivan, the last witness to see Father Reynolds, became a central figure in the investigation, but also a woman haunted by memories she couldn't fully comprehend. For weeks, she returned repeatedly to police with fragments of recollections, the way Father Reynolds had paused when mentioning those who walk in shadows during his homily, the strange manner in which he had touched his silver crucifix before heading to the confessional, and mainly that disturbed look she described as someone who had just seen his own fate. Margaret, a deeply religious woman who had lost 3 sons in the Vietnam War, now found herself questioning not only what had happened to her priest, but the very nature of her faith. The investigation revealed aspects of Father Reynolds's life that surprised even his closest parishioners. Detective Mitchell discovered that the priest had been studying obscure theological texts in the weeks prior to his disappearance, treatises on exorcism, manuscripts about demonic possessions, and correspondence with other priests specialized in supernatural phenomena. Father Reynolds had requested specific books from the diocese about malignant manifestations in sacred spaces, and had consulted demonology experts at the University of Notre Dame. When questioned about these sudden interests, Father O'Brien admitted that his predecessor had mentioned disturbing presences during recent confessions, but had never elaborated on the specific nature of these concerns. Father Thomas's personal life, which for more than 2 decades had been an open book to his congregation, began to reveal layers of complexity no one had suspected. Born Thomas Patrick Reynolds in Chicago in 1934, he had been abandoned at St. Vincent's Orphanage when he was only 7 years old, after his parents' death in a train accident. The orphanage records, obtained by Detective Mitchell, showed an exceptionally intelligent but deeply introspective boy who had found solace in prayers and religious studies from a very young age. His seminary colleagues described him as a dedicated young man, but also mysteriously reserved about his past, especially about the years before the orphanage. What most disturbed the investigation were the small anomalies that began to emerge as days passed. Several parishioners reported having vivid dreams about Father Reynolds on the night of his disappearance, dreams where he appeared in dark places, trying to communicate something urgent they couldn't understand. Mrs. Dorothy Hawkins, the church organist for 30 years, insisted she had heard the organ playing by itself in the early morning following the disappearance, performing a hymn she couldn't identify. The church janitor, Robert Chen, a Chinese immigrant who had worked for Father Reynolds for a decade, reported finding candles lit on the main altar on 3 consecutive mornings, despite being certain he had extinguished them the night before. Physical searches covered a 50-kilometer radius around Cedar Falls, mobilizing volunteers from neighboring communities, specialized search dogs, and even National Guard helicopters. Every abandoned barn, every dense forest, every frozen stream was meticulously examined by teams working 12-hour shifts. The local Amish community, normally reserved regarding town affairs, offered their horses and knowledge of the rural territory to assist in searches. For 6 weeks, Cedar Falls lived in a state of constant mobilization, with posters of Father Reynolds' kind face pasted on every telephone pole and store in the region. Detective Mitchell organized interviews with each of the 200 parishioners present at midnight mass, creating a voluminous dossier that revealed not only Father Reynolds's movements that fatal night, but also the hidden secrets and tensions of an apparently harmonious community. Stories emerged of old family rivalries, financial disputes related to church renovation, and even suspicions about congregation members whose behaviors had changed in the weeks prior to the disappearance. Each lead, however, led to dead ends, as if the mystery itself possessed an elusive quality that defied conventional investigation. In small towns, faith and fear often walk side by side, and when the unthinkable happens, both become indistinguishable. 3 months after the disappearance, the Diocese of Dubuque made the controversial decision to declare Father Reynolds presumed deceased under unknown circumstances, a classification that allowed for Father O'Brien's permanent appointment as pastor, but emotionally devastated parishioners who still harbored hopes of a miraculous return. This ecclesiastical decision, made without consulting the local congregation, marked the beginning of an even darker phase in Cedar Falls's history, where faith began to be questioned not only by the faithful, but by the religious authorities themselves. Detective Mitchell intensified her investigation by focusing on the most disturbing aspects of Father Reynolds' final months of life. The correspondence discovered in his office revealed a mind progressively tormented by concerns that transcended conventional pastoral problems. In letters sent to fellow priests specialized in supernatural cases, Father Thomas described growing manifestations of malignant nature during confessions, particularly involving 3 specific families from the congregation whose names he never explicitly revealed, referring to them only as the bearers of ancestral shadow. The investigation of these 3 unidentified families became an obsession for Detective Mitchell, who spent weeks analyzing Cedar Falls's genealogical records in search of patterns or historical connections that could explain Father Reynolds' concerns. What she discovered was a complex network of family interrelationships dating back to the town's founding in 1856, involving 3 founding lineages: the Blackwoods, owners of the region's largest corn farm; the Morrisons, the family of Deacon Andrew, who managed the local bank; and the Chens, the community's only non-Caucasians, whose patriarch Robert worked as the church janitor. The Blackwood family presented a particularly disturbing history that Captain Morrison, retired police chief and father of Deacon Andrew, reluctantly revealed to Detective Mitchell during a tense interview at his residence. The Blackwoods had lost 5 children under mysterious circumstances across 3 generations, deaths that official records attributed to accidents or illnesses, but that local oral tradition whispered about family curses and malignant presences that had haunted the family's rural property since the 19th century. Catherine Blackwood, the 67-year-old matriarch and one of Father Reynolds's most devout parishioners, had sought out the priest repeatedly in the weeks before his disappearance, reporting children's voices she heard during early morning hours and shadows moving against the light in her century-old house. Deacon Andrew Morrison, son of the former police chief and Father Reynolds's right hand in parish administration, became an increasingly suspicious figure as the investigation deepened. Detective Mitchell discovered inconsistencies in his testimony about the events of the disappearance night, particularly about the time it took him to look for Father Reynolds in the confessional and about private conversations he had with the priest in the preceding weeks. Andrew, a 35-year-old man married with 2 small daughters, managed not only the church finances but also had access to all areas of the building and intimately knew Father Reynolds's habits and routines. The investigation of the Chen family revealed a complex cultural dimension that added layers of mystery to the case. Robert Chen, the 45-year-old Chinese-American janitor, had emigrated from Hong Kong in 1975 and found work at the church through Father Reynolds, who spoke fluent Mandarin, a skill that surprised even his closest parishioners. Chen lived alone in a small house behind the church property and was known for his obsessive dedication to maintaining the sacred building, frequently working during nights and weekends. Detective Mitchell discovered that Chen had been found several times by Father Reynolds performing what he called energetic cleansings on the main altar, burning specific incense and murmuring prayers in Cantonese that weren't part of any known Christian liturgy. Tensions in the community intensified when rumors began circulating about possible involvement of non-Christian practices in the disappearance. Father O'Brien faced growing pressure from parishioners who demanded Robert Chen's dismissal and publicly questioned whether foreign influences in the church had contributed to their beloved pastor's disappearance. These racial tensions, latent in a homogeneously Caucasian community, emerged with a virulence that surprised even Cedar Falls's oldest residents. Forensic analysis of the confessional where Father Reynolds was last seen revealed intriguing discoveries that police initially kept secret. Criminology specialists from the University of Iowa found microscopic traces of an unidentified organic substance in the curtain fabric, a substance that emitted a sulfurous odor when heated and didn't correspond to any material known in criminal databases. Even more disturbing, temperature analyses revealed that the confessional's interior maintained a temperature consistently 3 degrees lower than the rest of the church, an anomaly that persisted for months after the disappearance and that no engineer could satisfactorily explain. Detective Mitchell began documenting what she would later call the 3 circles pattern, a series of disturbing coincidences that connected the 3 suspect families in ways that defied rational explanations. She discovered that Catherine Blackwood, Andrew Morrison, and Robert Chen had all been born on the same date, December 13th, in different years, and that all had lost parents under traumatic circumstances during childhood. More strangely, all reported having the same recurring nightmare in the weeks following the disappearance. Dreams where they walked down a dark corridor toward a light that revealed itself to be Father Reynolds, surrounded by unidentified shadowy figures. Pressure on Detective Mitchell intensified when the FBI decided to withdraw from the case after 3 months, without significant progress, leaving her alone to face an investigation that seemed to defy all conventional police work methods. Her own faith, never particularly solid, began to erode as she delved deeper into the case's most obscure aspects, particularly after she herself began experiencing vivid nightmares involving Father Reynolds and St. Margaret's Church. When the sacred becomes the scene of the inexplicable, even the most skeptical investigators begin to question the boundaries between faith and reality. A year had passed since the disappearance when Cedar Falls faced its first Christmas without Father Reynolds, a celebration that became more of a collective mourning than a religious festivity. Father O'Brien struggled to keep the congregation united, while deep fissures continued opening between families, particularly between those who accepted the official version of events and those with growing suspicions about internal involvement in the disappearance. The 1988 Midnight Mass attracted only half the usual congregation, with the side confessional permanently sealed by order of the diocese, a decision that symbolized not only the end of ecclesiastical investigations, but also the tacit admission that some mysteries transcend human capacity for understanding. Detective Mitchell, now working essentially alone on the case, had developed a disturbing theory she hesitated to share with her superiors or the community. Based on months of genealogical and historical research, she had discovered that Cedar Falls had been built on the site of a Native American massacre in 1847, 9 years before the town's official founding. Military records, obtained through federal archives, documented the deaths of 47 members of the Sauk tribe in an event that official reports euphemistically described as territorial conflict resolution, but that contemporary witnesses had characterized as summary execution of non-combatants, including children and elderly. The connection between this historical massacre and Father Reynolds' disappearance became clearer when Detective Mitchell discovered correspondence between the priest and anthropology professors at the University of Iowa, where he had been researching Native American rituals related to communication with spirits of unavenged dead. Father Reynolds had apparently discovered the same historical information and had begun to suspect that the malignant manifestations he experienced in the church were connected to the unresolved ancestral trauma of the territory where St. Margaret's had been built. Catherine Blackwood, the farming family's matriarch, finally broke her silence during an emotional interview with Detective Mitchell in the fall of 1988. With tears streaming down her aged face, she revealed that her family had kept a terrible secret for 4 generations. Her great-grandfather, Colonel James Blackwood, had been the military officer responsible for the 1847 massacre. The Blackwood family property included what she believed to be the exact site of the massacre, and for decades she had experienced phenomena she described as visitations, apparitions of native figures she saw during new moon nights, always accompanied by sounds of lamentations that seemed to emerge from the earth itself. Andrew Morrison, the deacon, faced growing pressure when Detective Mitchell discovered he had lied about his activities on the night of the disappearance. Confronted with evidence that he had left the church for approximately 20 minutes during Mass, precisely during the period when Father Reynolds disappeared, Andrew finally admitted to going to the church cemetery to check disturbances he had heard in the previous days. He described finding several old tombstones vandalized with symbols he couldn't identify and hearing chanting in a foreign language emanating from the cemetery's oldest section, where the town's founders were buried. Robert Chen, the Chinese janitor, became an even more enigmatic figure when Detective Mitchell discovered his real name was Chen Wei-ming, and that he had left Hong Kong under mysterious circumstances related to what immigration records vaguely described as illegal spiritual activities. Chen had been a practitioner of traditional Chinese medicine and Taoist rituals before his apparent conversion to Christianity, and Detective Mitchell found in his residence an extensive collection of texts on exorcism and spiritual purification in various Asian languages. More disturbing, she discovered that Chen had been documenting paranormal activities in the church for years, maintaining a detailed diary in Mandarin that described hostile presences that intensified during certain specific dates on the calendar. The investigation revealed that Father Reynolds had discovered Chen's diary and had begun consulting experts in comparative religions at the University of Iowa about possible methods of spiritual purification for historically traumatized locations. His final correspondence, sent only 2 weeks before his disappearance, discussed theories about residual spiritual energy and the possibility that collective traumas could create spiritual imprints that persisted through generations. The Cedar Falls community began to fragment as these revelations gradually emerged through investigative leaks and rumors. Families that had worshipped together for decades found themselves divided between those who accepted supernatural explanations for the disappearance and those who insisted on rational solutions. Church attendance dropped dramatically, with many parishioners reporting feeling watched by invisible presences during religious services. Father O'Brien faced his own crisis of faith as he witnessed his congregation's disintegration and experienced disturbing phenomena he struggled to rationalize within his traditional theology. He began documenting his own experiences: anomalous temperatures during masses, inaudible whispers during silent prayers, and a persistent sensation of hostile presence, specifically in the sealed confessional where Father Reynolds had disappeared. Detective Mitchell, now working essentially as an independent investigator after the official department archived the case, developed an obsessive routine of nighttime vigils at the church, determined to personally witness any anomalous activity. During these solitary vigils, she began experiencing phenomena that challenged her scientific view of the world. Lights moving without apparent source, sounds of organ playing melodies that existed in no known hymnal, and one disturbing occasion where she swore she heard Father Reynolds' voice calling her name from inside the sealed confessional. There are mysteries that don't seek solution, but recognition, truths that await not investigators, but witnesses willing to face the inexplicable. 5 years had passed since the disappearance, when Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a forensic anthropologist from the University of Chicago, specializing in historical traumas and their contemporary manifestations, arrived in Cedar Falls to conduct what she called an archaeological investigation of collective memory. Discreetly hired by the Diocese of Dubuque, which faced growing pressure from Rome regarding the unsolved case, Dr. Warren brought sophisticated detection equipment and a multidisciplinary approach that combined forensic science with anthropological studies of unexplained phenomena. Dr. Warren, a 41-year-old woman with a doctorate in anthropology and postgraduate studies in criminal psychology, had investigated dozens of cases involving traumatized locations, places where violent events from the past seemed to influence contemporary experiences in ways that defied conventional scientific explanation. Her arrival in Cedar Falls marked the first time Father Reynolds' disappearance would be investigated through a lens that took seriously both physical evidence and reports of paranormal experiences, treating both as valid data for analysis. Se este caso já te prendeu, deixa o like. Isso ajuda o canal a trazer mais histórias como essa e a história do Father Thomas Reynolds a alcançar mais pessoas. Dr. Warren's team conducted what she described as mapping of traumatic imprints, a process involving electromagnetic detectors, infrared cameras, sensitive audio recording equipment, and structured interviews with residents who had experienced anomalous phenomena. What they discovered was a consistent pattern of anomalous electromagnetic activity centered specifically in the confessional where Father Reynolds had disappeared, with readings showing impossible fluctuations according to known laws of physics. Detective Mitchell, now retired but still obsessed with the case, became Dr. Warren's unofficial collaborator, providing 5 years of meticulous documentation and serving as a local guide to the investigation's most obscure aspects. Together, they began mapping what Dr. Warren called the convergence pattern, a series of temporal coincidences suggesting that Father Reynolds' disappearance had occurred during what she theorized was a moment of maximum spiritual vulnerability when multiple traumatic energies aligned. Dr. Warren's historical analysis revealed that December 24, 1987, marked exactly 140 years since the Native American massacre, and that several anomalous deaths in the Blackwood family had occurred at intervals of exactly 35 years, a pattern she had observed in other traumatized locations where residual energy seemed to manifest in specific temporal cycles. More disturbing, she discovered that Father Reynolds had disappeared exactly at midnight, the moment when, according to Native American traditions, the veil between physical and spiritual worlds is thinnest. Robert Chen, the Chinese janitor, became a crucial source of information when Dr. Warren discovered that his Mandarin diary contained detailed observations about spiritual disturbances that corresponded exactly with the patterns she was documenting scientifically. Chen had recorded that anomalies in the church intensified during certain lunar phases and on dates that, when Dr. Warren verified them, corresponded with anniversaries of violent deaths in the Blackwood family across several generations. Dr. Warren's investigation of the Morrison family revealed disturbing connections no one had suspected. Andrew Morrison, the deacon, was a direct descendant of Lieutenant Samuel Morrison, the second officer responsible for the 1847 massacre. This genealogical discovery explained why Andrew had experienced inexplicable compulsions to visit the cemetery during times when, according to Chen's diary, spiritual activity peaked in the area. The convergence of these 3 bloodlines, the Blackwoods, descendants of the massacre's commander, the Morrisons, descendants of his lieutenant, and Chen, a spiritual practitioner sensitive to residual energies, created what Dr. Warren termed a perfect storm of unresolved trauma. Her theory suggested that Father Reynolds, through his research into the historical massacre and his growing awareness of the supernatural manifestations, had inadvertently positioned himself at the center of a spiritual conflict that had been building for 140 years. Dr. Warren's most startling discovery came when she analyzed the specific location of the confessional within the church's architecture. Using ground-penetrating radar and geological surveys, she determined that the confessional stood directly above what had been a sacred burial ground of the Sauk tribe, a location that, according to tribal traditions Chen had researched, served as a portal for communication between the living and the dead. Father Reynolds' disappearance had occurred not just in any confessional, but in the exact spot where Native American spiritual leaders had once conducted rituals for guiding lost souls to the afterlife. The investigation reached its climax when Dr. Warren's team detected what she called temporal displacement signatures, electromagnetic readings that suggested reality itself had been disrupted in the confessional on the night of December 24, 1987. These readings, impossible according to conventional physics, indicated that Father Reynolds hadn't simply disappeared, but had been transported through what she theorized was a crack between dimensions, created by the convergence of historical trauma, spiritual energy, and temporal alignment. Sometimes the most profound mysteries are solved not by finding what was lost, but by understanding why it needed to disappear. Dr. Warren's scientific investigation took an unexpected turn when she decided to conduct what she called controlled communication experiments in the sealed confessional, using electromagnetic field generators and audio amplification equipment to attempt contact with whatever forces had been responsible for Father Reynolds' disappearance. Working alongside Detective Mitchell and, reluctantly, the three descendants, Catherine Blackwood, Andrew Morrison, and Robert Chen, Dr. Warren created what she termed a bridge between scientific methodology and spiritual investigation. The first experiment, conducted on the night of December 13th, the shared birthday of the three descendants, produced results that challenged every participant's understanding of reality. As Dr. Warren's equipment registered massive electromagnetic fluctuations, the temperature in the confessional dropped to freezing levels, while the rest of the church remained at normal temperature. More startling, the audio equipment captured what sounded like multiple voices speaking simultaneously. Father Reynolds's voice mixed with Native American chanting, and what Chen identified as prayers for the dead in ancient Mandarin. Catherine Blackwood, now 72 and frail but determined to confront her family's ancestral guilt, experienced what she described as visions of the massacre during the experiment. She saw her great-grandfather, Colonel James Blackwood, ordering the execution of Sauk families, but more disturbing, she witnessed Father Reynolds standing among the Native American victims as if he had somehow been transported back to 1847. He was trying to give them last rites, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. He was trying to bring them peace across time itself. Andrew Morrison broke down during the third experiment, confessing that he had been experiencing inherited memories of his ancestors' participation in the massacre for months before Father Reynolds's disappearance. The guilt had driven him to visit the cemetery obsessively, where he claimed to see ghostly figures of children who seemed to be searching for something. Dr. Warren's readings confirmed that Andrew's presence in the cemetery coincided with the highest levels of paranormal activity, suggesting that his bloodline connection made him a conduit for the unresolved spiritual trauma. Robert Chen revealed the most disturbing information when he admitted that his conversion to Christianity had been motivated by his ability to see hungry ghosts, spirits of those who had died violently and remained trapped between worlds. He had recognized immediately that St. Margaret's Church was built on a site of immense spiritual disturbance and had taken the janitor position to perform secret Taoist purification rituals. Father Reynolds was not the first, Chen confessed in broken English. The spirits had been trying to speak for 140 years. He was first to listen. Dr. Warren's analysis of the audio recordings revealed a chilling pattern. The voices captured during the experiments weren't random, but were recounting the events of December 24, 1987, from multiple perspectives. Father Reynolds's voice described walking into the confessional and suddenly finding himself in a place between places, where the spirits of the massacred Sauk tribe had been waiting for someone with enough spiritual authority to help them cross over to the afterlife. The Native American voices spoke of their gratitude to the priest, who had voluntarily entered their realm to perform the sacred rites they had been denied in death. The investigation revealed that Father Reynolds had not been killed or kidnapped, but had made a conscious choice to sacrifice himself to resolve the spiritual crisis that had been building for over a century. His research into the historical massacre and his growing awareness of the supernatural manifestations had led him to understand that only someone with his ecclesiastical authority could perform the necessary spiritual intervention to release the trapped souls. Dr. Warren's final experiment, conducted exactly 1 year after Father Reynolds's disappearance, provided the most compelling evidence yet. Using all three descendants as spiritual conduits and performing the experiment at exactly midnight on December 24th, she managed to establish clear communication with Father Reynolds's spirit. His message was both heartbreaking and redemptive. He had chosen to remain with the massacred spirits until all 47 souls had been properly blessed and released to the afterlife. The priest's voice, captured clearly on Dr. Warren's equipment, explained that his disappearance had been necessary to break the cycle of trauma that had plagued Cedar Falls for generations. By voluntarily entering the spiritual realm and performing last rites for the massacred Native Americans, he had fulfilled their desperate need for proper spiritual passage. His sacrifice had not only freed the trapped souls, but had also released the three descendant families from the inherited guilt that had haunted their bloodlines for 140 years. Catherine Blackwood felt immediate relief from the visitations that had tormented her family for generations. Andrew Morrison reported that his compulsive cemetery visits ended immediately, and he began experiencing peaceful sleep for the first time in months. Robert Chen confirmed that the hungry ghosts he had seen throughout the church had finally departed, leaving behind only the peaceful energy of consecrated ground. Dr. I. Warren's final report concluded that Father Thomas Reynolds had achieved what she called temporal martyrdom, sacrificing his earthly existence to resolve a historical injustice that transcended conventional understanding of time and space. His disappearance represented Dr. Warren's final report concluded that Father Thomas Reynolds had achieved what she called temporal martyrdom, sacrificing his earthly existence to resolve a historical injustice that transcended conventional understanding of time and space. His disappearance represented not a tragedy, but a conscious act of spiritual heroism that had freed both the living and the dead from a cycle of trauma that had persisted for nearly 150 years. 20 years had passed since Father Reynolds' disappearance, when construction workers renovating the St. Margaret's Church basement made a discovery that would finally provide physical evidence for Dr. Warren's theories. While installing a new heating system, they uncovered a hidden chamber beneath the church's foundation, a chamber that contained artifacts and human remains dating back to the original Sauk settlement. Among the discovered items was Father Reynolds' silver crucifix, the one he had been wearing the night he disappeared, lying beside what appeared to be Native American burial objects and the remains of 47 individuals. Detective Mitchell, now 67 years old but still sharp, was called back to the scene by the current police chief, her former partner, Detective James Crawford. The discovery vindicated decades of her theorizing and Dr. Warren's scientific investigations. Carbon dating confirmed that the human remains were indeed from the 1847 massacre, and forensic analysis revealed that they had been hastily buried in what was clearly a mass grave, evidence of the war crime that official military records had tried to conceal. Father Reynolds' crucifix showed no signs of aging despite being underground for 2 decades. More mysteriously, it was found clutched in the skeletal hand of what appeared to be a Sauk spiritual leader, suggesting that even in death, the priest had continued his mission of providing spiritual comfort to the massacred tribe. Dr. Warren, now in her 60s and considered one of the world's leading experts on historical trauma sites, returned to Cedar Falls to study the discovery. The hidden chamber revealed a complex spiritual ecosystem that had existed beneath the church for over a century. Native American prayer objects, Christian rosaries, and Chinese protective talismans were found intermingled, suggesting that Robert Chen had indeed been conducting secret purification rituals in the basement for years. Chen, now retired and living with his daughter in California, confirmed when contacted that he had discovered the chamber during his first week as janitor and had been trying to calm the angry spirits through traditional Taoist ceremonies. Catherine Blackwood, now 87 and one of the few surviving witnesses to the original investigation, felt a profound sense of closure when she learned about the discovery. 4 generations of my family carried the weight of what my great-grandfather did, she said in a wheelchair-bound interview. Knowing that Father Reynolds completed what should have been done 150 years ago, it feels like our family can finally rest. She passed away peacefully in her sleep just 3 days after the discovery, the first Blackwood in generations to die without reporting supernatural visitations. Andrew Morrison, now serving as the church's head deacon under Father O'Brien, had become the unofficial historian of Father Reynolds' case. His own spiritual journey had led him to study Native American theology and learn about Sauk burial traditions. Father Reynolds didn't just disappear, he reflected during a memorial service for the discovered remains. He crossed over to complete the work that should have been done when these people were first killed. He gave them the sacred rites they were denied in life. The Diocese of Dubuque officially declared Father Reynolds a martyr, recognizing his disappearance as a voluntary sacrifice for the spiritual welfare of others. Pope Francis, in a rare statement about unexplained phenomena, acknowledged that God's grace can manifest in ways that transcend human understanding, and Father Reynolds' sacrifice exemplifies the highest calling of pastoral service. The Vatican initiated the preliminary stages of beatification, the first step toward potential sainthood. Dr. Warren's final investigation of the site revealed that the electromagnetic anomalies that had plagued the church for decades had completely disappeared after the discovery and proper reburial of the Native American remains. The temperature variations, unexplained sounds, and spiritual disturbances that multiple witnesses had reported over the years ceased entirely. It's as if the entire location exhaled after holding its breath for 150 years, she noted in her concluding report. Robert Chen returned to Cedar Falls for the reburial ceremony, now 75, and walking with a cane but still sharp-minded. He performed a final purification ritual, this time in full view of the congregation, combining Taoist, Native American, and Christian elements in a ceremony that Dr. Warren described as the most spiritually powerful event I've ever witnessed. Chen revealed that he had sensed Father Reynolds' presence throughout his years of secret rituals and had always known that the priest's sacrifice had been necessary and voluntary. The discovery led to a broader historical reckoning in Cedar Falls and throughout Iowa. The state officially acknowledged the 1847 Sauk massacre, erecting a memorial on the site where the mass grave was discovered. The three founding families, the Blackwoods, Morrisons, and Chen family, established a foundation to study historical trauma and its contemporary manifestations, with Dr. Warren serving as the scientific director. Father O'Brien, who had served the parish for over 2 decades since Father Reynolds' disappearance, reported that the church now felt truly peaceful for the first time since he had arrived. The confessional where Father Reynolds had vanished was unsealed and restored, and many parishioners reported feeling a sense of blessing when praying there. It's become a place of healing rather than mystery, Father O'Brien observed. People come there specifically to pray for those who have died without proper spiritual care. The case attracted international attention from both religious scholars and paranormal researchers. The combination of historical documentation, scientific investigation, and spiritual resolution created what experts called the most well-documented case of supernatural intervention in modern religious history. Universities around the world began studying the Cedar Falls incident as an example of how historical trauma can manifest across generations and how spiritual intervention can provide resolution. Sometimes the greatest acts of faith require stepping into the unknown, trusting that love transcends even the boundaries between life and death. 25 years after Father Reynolds' disappearance, Cedar Falls had transformed from a community haunted by mystery into one of the most studied examples of historical healing and spiritual resolution in North America. The St. Margaret's Church had become a pilgrimage site for people dealing with unresolved trauma, both personal and generational. Dr. Warren's Research Center, established in the renovated church basement where the hidden chamber had been discovered, attracted scholars from around the world, studying the intersection of historical violence and contemporary spiritual manifestations. Detective Mitchell, now retired but serving as a consultant for cold cases involving unexplained disappearances, had written a definitive book about the investigation titled The Shepherd's Choice: Faith Beyond Understanding. Her work had inspired a new approach to missing persons cases, one that considered not just physical evidence, but the historical and spiritual contexts surrounding disappearances. Police departments across the country consulted her methods when dealing with cases that seemed to defy conventional investigation. The three families most affected by the case had found their own forms of peace and purpose. The Morrison family had used their banking resources to establish scholarships for Native American students studying theology and social work. Andrew Morrison, now in his 60s, had become a bridge between the Catholic Church and local Native American communities, facilitating dialogue about historical injustices and paths toward healing. His daughters, now adults, carried on the family's commitment to social justice, working with indigenous rights organizations. The Chen family story had taken an unexpected turn when Robert Chen's daughter, Dr. Sarah Chen Williams, became one of the world's leading experts in cross-cultural spiritual healing practices. Inspired by her father's role in the Father Reynolds case, she had studied both traditional Chinese medicine and comparative theology, developing treatment methods for people suffering from what she termed inherited spiritual trauma. Her clinic in San Francisco treated patients from around the world who reported experiences similar to those documented in Cedar Falls. Catherine Blackwood had passed peacefully, but her family's commitment to making amends for their ancestors' actions had continued through her grandchildren. The Blackwood Foundation, endowed by the sale of the family farm, funded research into historical atrocities and their long-term psychological effects on communities. The foundation had helped establish similar investigation and healing processes in locations across the United States, where historical violence had occurred. St. Margaret's Church itself had become a model for how religious institutions could address historical trauma. Father O'Brien, now approaching retirement, had developed what became known as the Cedar Falls Protocol, a systematic approach for churches and other religious institutions built on sites of historical violence to acknowledge past traumas and facilitate healing for affected communities. The Vatican had officially endorsed these methods, and they were being implemented at Catholic sites worldwide. Dr. Warren's research had evolved into a new field of study called historical trauma archaeology, which combined forensic science, anthropology, psychology, and theology to understand how past violence continues to affect present communities. Her team had investigated over 50 similar sites worldwide, discovering that the patterns documented in Cedar Falls, electromagnetic anomalies, recurring nightmares among descendant families, and spiritual disturbances in locations built over trauma sites, were far more common than previously understood. The case had also attracted the attention of Vatican investigators studying miracles and unexplained phenomena. Father Reynolds's beatification process had progressed further than anyone expected, with documented cases of healing and spiritual intervention associated with prayers offered in his memory. 3 separate incidents of missing persons being found after family members prayed specifically to Father Reynolds had been verified by church investigators, lending support to his potential sainthood. The scientific community had grudgingly begun to acknowledge that the Cedar Falls case represented phenomena that couldn't be easily dismissed or explained by conventional methods. Dr. Warren's electromagnetic readings, combined with the historical documentation and the physical evidence of the hidden chamber, had created the most comprehensive study of unexplained phenomena in academic history. Several universities had established programs to study similar cases, using the Cedar Falls investigation as their foundational methodology. Cedar Falls itself had embraced its unique history, establishing the Reynolds Center for Historical Healing, which offered counseling and support for families dealing with inherited trauma. The center's approach, combining traditional therapy with spiritual counseling and historical research, had achieved remarkable success rates in helping people resolve psychological issues related to family history. Visitors came from across North America, seeking help with recurring nightmares, unexplained fears, and family patterns of tragedy that seemed to transcend normal psychological explanations. The town's annual Memorial Day service had evolved into a ceremony honoring both Father Reynolds and the 47 Sauk tribe members whose remains had been discovered beneath the church. The service, attended by Catholic clergy, Native American spiritual leaders, and representatives from the Chinese American community, had become a powerful symbol of cross-cultural healing and reconciliation. The ceremony always concluded with participants walking through the restored confessional where Father Reynolds had made his sacrifice, many reporting feelings of peace and resolution. Local schools had incorporated the Father Reynolds story into their curriculum, teaching students about the importance of addressing historical injustices and the power of individual sacrifice for the greater good. Children who had grown up with the story often chose careers in social work, conflict resolution, or religious service, creating a generation committed to healing historical wounds and preventing future injustices. Heroes are not always those who return from their journeys, but sometimes those who choose to remain where they are most needed. 38 years after that Christmas Eve, when Father Thomas Reynolds walked into eternity, Cedar Falls stands as a testament to the profound mystery of faith intersecting with the inexplicable. The small Iowa town, once known only for its cornfields and quiet streets, had become an international symbol of how love and sacrifice can transcend the boundaries between worlds. The St. Margaret's Catholic Church, where a priest had voluntarily entered the realm of the dead to bring peace to tormented souls, now serves thousands of pilgrims seeking their own spiritual healing and understanding. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, now recognized as the world's foremost authority on historical trauma and spiritual manifestations, had established her permanent research headquarters in Cedar Falls. Her team continued to document similar cases worldwide, but none had provided the clear resolution and comprehensive evidence found in the Father Reynolds case. What happened here, she often told visitors, represents the most documented example we have of love transcending death itself. Father Reynolds didn't just disappear, he completed a sacred mission, that took him beyond the boundaries of our physical reality. The Vatican's investigation into Father Reynolds's potential sainthood had attracted global attention, with Pope Francis himself visiting Cedar Falls to pray in the confessional where the priest had made his ultimate sacrifice. The Pope's statement after his visit had been simple but profound. In Father Reynolds we see the ultimate expression of pastoral love, a shepherd who followed his flock even into the valley of death to ensure their safe passage home. The beatification process was expected to conclude within the next year, making Father Reynolds the first American saint whose miracles involved direct interaction with the spiritual realm. Detective Sarah Mitchell, now 82 and still sharp despite her age, had become the unofficial guardian of Father Reynolds' story. Her book about the case had become required reading in police academies and theological seminaries, bridging the gap between criminal investigation and spiritual mystery. "What I learned from Father Reynolds," she reflected in recent interviews, "is that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved in the conventional sense. They're meant to teach us about the limits of human understanding and the unlimited nature of divine love." The three families whose ancestors were connected to the historical massacre had found peace, but their commitment to healing continued through new generations. Andrew Morrison's grandson had been ordained as a Catholic priest and was serving in a parish on a Native American reservation, continuing the work of reconciliation that Father Reynolds had died to accomplish. The Chen family had established meditation centers in 5 major cities, teaching the integration of Eastern and Western spiritual practices that Robert Chen had pioneered in his secret basement rituals. St. Margaret's Church had been designated a National Historic Site, not for its architecture, but for its role in what historians called the most significant spiritual event in modern American religious history. The church's daily masses were attended by visitors from around the world, many reporting profound spiritual experiences while praying in the restored confessional. Father O'Brien, now in his 70s, had trained a team of younger priests to help counsel the thousands of visitors who came seeking healing from their own inherited traumas. The hidden chamber beneath the church had been transformed into a memorial chapel where the remains of the 47 Sauk tribe members rested in peace alongside a shrine to Father Reynolds. The electromagnetic anomalies that had once plagued the location had been replaced by what visitors consistently described as an overwhelming sense of peace and blessing. Native American spiritual leaders from across the continent had declared the site sacred, recognizing it as a place where the deepest wounds of historical injustice had been healed through ultimate sacrifice. Cedar Falls had embraced its transformation from a quiet farming community to an international destination for spiritual healing. The town's population had grown to accommodate the researchers, clergy, and healing practitioners who had moved there to be part of the continuing work. Local businesses thrived not from exploitation of the mystery, but from genuine service to visitors seeking healing and understanding. The community had maintained its essential character, while opening its heart to people from around the world, carrying their own burdens of inherited pain. The scientific study of the case had revolutionized multiple academic fields. Dr. Warren's documentation had provided the first empirical evidence that consciousness could exist independently of physical form, and that emotional trauma could create persistent energy patterns affecting subsequent generations. Universities worldwide had established research programs based on the Cedar Falls protocols, investigating similar sites and documenting cases of spiritual intervention in human affairs. Perhaps most significantly, the Father Reynolds case had sparked a broader conversation about the relationship between historical injustice and contemporary spiritual and psychological problems. Native American communities, Holocaust survivors, descendants of slavery, and other groups affected by historical trauma found in the Cedar Falls story a model for understanding and healing inherited pain. The concept of inherited spiritual trauma had become accepted in psychological and theological circles, leading to new approaches to therapy and pastoral care. On this 38th anniversary of Father Reynolds' disappearance, Cedar Falls prepared for its largest memorial service ever. Representatives from the Vatican, Native American nations, Buddhist monasteries, and academic institutions worldwide would gather to honor a man who had chosen to step beyond the known world to heal wounds that had festered for nearly 150 years. The service would conclude, as it had for decades, with participants walking through the confessional where Father Reynolds had made his choice, many leaving with the same sense of peace and resolution that the priest had given to 47 souls who had waited too long for their final blessing. As the sun set over the Iowa farmland surrounding Cedar Falls, the mystery of Father Thomas Reynolds remained as profound as ever. But it was no longer a mystery that tormented or frightened. It had become a mystery that healed, that inspired, and that demonstrated the ultimate truth of faith, that love, properly understood and completely offered, can indeed transcend every boundary, even the one between life and death. The shepherd had found his flock, and in laying down his life for them, he had shown the world that some sacrifices echo through eternity, transforming not just those they were meant to save, but everyone who witnesses their power. In the end, the greatest mysteries are not those that confuse us, but those that transform us, reminding us that love is indeed stronger than death, and that faith, when carried to its ultimate conclusion, can heal wounds that time alone never could. Subscribe to our channel to explore more archived and disturbing cases. Thank you for following Father Thomas Reynolds' story. We'll see you in the next video.